And you ask anybody on the Justice League, they'll tell you I am an invaluable member of this team.
Okay. All right, Dasani. Lay it on me. Tell me what you can do, Mountain Valley Spring.
Okay. I can communicate with every living creature living in our vast oceans.
Okay. Talks to fish. Got it.
Also,
I'm gonna stop you right there, because I know your powers. It's talks to fish. The rest of the page is blank. For office use only.
I have sonar.
Yeah, for talking to fish.
I have super hearing.
So you can listen to fish?
I can breathe underwater.
Because that's where the fish you talk to are?
Night vision.
So you can find the fish.
Tune up, level up your fun, tune up. Your quest has now begun, tune up. We'll show you how it's done. Tune up, tune up, tune up, tune up. Tune up, level up your fun, tune up. Your quest has now begun, tune up. We'll show you how it's done. Tune up, tune up, tune up.
All right, Ben, we're here.
It is time for another episode.
Hey, it's nice to be past the holiday shenanigans. We're back to some normal sessions, almost weekly, right?
Yeah, I feel like everybody's schedule quiets down a little bit more and we can get to some real important gaming action these days.
Oh, heck yeah. All right. Well, today we're gonna try to not just balance our lives, with good games. We're gonna try to balance our games.
That's important. Game balance. It's a big topic, you guys. It's one of those things that people talk about a lot. We often judge systems by if it's balanced or not. Do we have a good balance in this game?
Yeah.
A lot of times people will talk about is there enough balance in this party? Is this character better or worse than that character, and so on?
Feels like this has always been a part of my gaming experience, maybe even more so with these newer editions. We'll get into that a little bit, the history of balance in RPGs. But for now, we're going to talk real quick about some of the challenges of, what we're going to explore here today, some of the challenges of crafting your party with a semblance of balance, and your game for that matter.
What we're going to talk about includes not just parties amongst themselves and how the players might be balanced with respect to their characters, but also beyond party composition, thinking about the kinds of challenges and how to balance those challenges. We've talked about that a little bit in terms of encounter design, but I think we're really going to drill down today into something a little bit deeper.
So let's talk about some ways we can kind of define balance, I guess, in what we're talking about here.
I think there's at least 3 ways that we can talk about balance. One is in terms of the balance of the breadth of the party, the composition of the party, the capabilities that the party has. And so the kind of the classic expression of this, if you want to think about D&D, is the way they would have what they call kind of the 4 corners of the party, right? It was classically you'd have a wizard, a rogue, a fighter, and then a cleric. And if you had those characters, you had essentially everything that you might need.
It was literally like covering all the basics. Some of the early Dungeons and Dragons games were tournament based.
Right.
So they wanted to get through the tournament, you wanted to have a rounded party that could achieve all the different goals. So you needed the rogue, you needed the wizard, you needed the fighter, you needed the cleric. That would fill out your party and round it out.
Other games, that's less necessary in some cases, but even in, say, a superhero game, you might have a brick and a blaster and a speedster and so on. And so that's number one. It's the balance in terms of the breadth of the player capabilities, the character's capabilities of the game. The second idea here would be the balance in terms of the capabilities of any one character relative to the other characters. Okay. And Mark, I think we've got a particular offender here. It's Rifts. I love Rifts.
Yeah.
I loved the world of Rifts. I loved the game. It was one of my primary games. But my goodness, that was a game where you could play this armored 9-foot-tall boom gun wielding glitter boy, or you could play a super squishy, city rat who had nothing. And you could create parties that had both kinds of characters. Vastly different.
But I'll say this, you don't have to be playing Rifts to have that experience, though.
True.
I've seen games of Dungeons and Dragons where players who are vastly experienced at making powerful characters sit at a table with somebody who's just started, and it's like you might as well be running around in that Rifts battle armor.
Yeah.
It's really more about the perception of the players, how they perceive their character in relation to the other characters, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that perception point is really important. I mean, there's math involved too, but like it's important that if the players are feeling like, hey, I'm falling behind the other characters here, that's going to be something you need to address. Okay, the third type of balance we want to talk about is the fit between the PCs and the challenges that they're going to face in the encounters.
Yeah.
And we talked a bit about that in terms of encounter design before. We'll talk more about that today, but that's this third kind. It's essentially, I think of it as the fit between the world and the characters.
So we have these different things that could create imbalance, things that we can observe as potentially being imbalancing things. How do these come up in play? Like, how do we recognize this imbalance?
Things could be imbalanced because it could be possible that the system is imbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Well, you mentioned rifts. That would be a classic example for us.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, these guys, what's funny is some people, when you say, oh, that's a bug, they go, no, that's a virtue. That's a feature. For you Rifts players out there that are ready to spam us and tell us how we're wrong about that, yeah, we get it. Rifts kind of built itself that way intentionally, and that's fine. But the point is, it could be a system thing. It could also be that if you're thinking about the thing about player capabilities and the character capabilities and whether you've got the relevant breadth you need, it could be that the players have only focused on just their character. They haven't focused on what else is going on in the group.
Yeah, too many of one class maybe, or they're not spreading out and getting all the skills. So that could be unknowingly creating an imbalance.
Yeah, and I think you've seen this, Mark, where you can have parties that, again, I'll use D&D for an example, but like rather than the fighter, rogue, wizard, cleric, you'll have like a druid, a paladin, and I sweat a little bit more as a GM if I'm not really confident about what players' capabilities are like.
Yeah, it's true. If you're ever playing games like pickup games and things like that, you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And balance could even happen by the level of skills of some and creativity of some players in relation to the other players. So that could create vast gaps. I talked a little bit about that, how, players can maybe make really powerful characters in like Shadowrun or maybe they're playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Pathfinder's a typical example here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the chasm between the inexperienced player and the experienced player could be massive. What else we got? We got encounter designs.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this when we talked about encounter design. And I think you and I both have cases where we've kind of overshot and it turns out we put an encounter that was a little too tough for the party. And I'm sure there's also cases where we've undershot. Encounter that you thought was going to be important or interesting turned out to be something they walked through pretty easily. What's interesting about those cases is that in this discussion, we're really focused on the party's capabilities. And so a big part of encounter balance is going to also be how well you understand what the party can do.
I can think of one other way I've thrown my games out of balance before. I'm sure you have. I'm sure every GM has.
I know this happened a lot around the introduction of 5e, really.
Oh my gosh. I've thrown out items in the game that I did not realize were that powerful. Oh man.
When 5e first came out, if you started handing out armor and rings of protection and things like that had a lot higher capability, you learned pretty fast that this didn't scale the same way that earlier editions did. It wasn't linear. You know what's funny too? Just a quick side note on that is it doesn't even have to be the items powerful. It could be that you've got an exceptionally creative player who can do stuff with an immovable rod or who can do stuff with a jar of smoke, or there's like, isn't there like a jar that can like always pour out water and pretty soon you've got like a hydrologist on your party,
Yeah. I mean, creative players can they're just going to rise to the occasion anyway.
It's a good problem to have.
It's a great problem to have. So we've identified some of the ways games can become imbalanced. Let's take a little break here from that. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
What about the history of balance in RPGs? Those early games were not balanced. Not at all.
Well, and I think it's interesting that we had this expectation at any point that these needed to be balanced. Like, why do we think games should be balanced in the first place?
I have a culprit. I'm going to throw it out there.
All right.
I really think a lot of this has to do with like World of Warcraft, MMOs. I think somewhere along the line, these kind of other games and experiences came in where balance was very important. If you weren't happy with your character in World of Warcraft, you would have to wait for the next patch, where they would balance things out. I kind of felt like 3rd edition came out around the same time. 5th edition came out after. And when 5th came out, it was really balanced. Like there was a definite concerted effort to make the parody feel right, so that anybody could feel like they could jump into character and feel like they were as vital to that group as anybody else.
Yeah, I think that to the extent that people looked at these as games and they looked at the systems and the mechanical elements of these things and said, okay, well, that should function like a game. And in a game, there shouldn't be only one winning strategy, right? Like, it shouldn't be that in order to win at this game, the only character you would ever take would be a fighter or a Jedi or a take your pick, you know? When you looked at what RPGs could do, because they were very open-ended and they had a GM who was administrating that stuff, there was always this kind of expectation. And I think this fits in with that point about house rules we made a while back. You know, you remember we talked about how house rules back in those earlier editions, everybody was kind of expected to do it. And I think the point was that was supposed to kind of serve balance or serve the sense of fun and things like that.
I remember early games, we would balance it in all sorts of different ways. Rules, like you say, it would be one. Items was a way to, kind of balance these out. Notoriously, in those early games, Ben, I remember, like, did you ever play a wizard at levels 1 through 4?
I remember the first time I played a wizard back in those early editions, and I was like, how does anybody even survive this?
Yeah, and then you were supposed to get to the end of the game, and at the end of the game, you were now the one who was overly balanced. You were the master of the domain, whereas earlier it was definitely not you.
Yeah, I mean, for those that maybe don't remember this or haven't played those earlier editions, if you were a first level wizard in older editions of D&D, there were no cantrips, there were no spells you could cast as many times as you liked.
Maybe 3 to 4 casts of a spell, and you were now hiding behind those people swinging weapons.
Right, and you had very few hit points, so you'd be crushed if you were not careful. And you'd be
1d4.
Yeah, D4 hit dice, and so it was bad. So the point is, but then your point was, like, over time that shifted, right? If you ended up being a 10th level wizard, you could drop meteors on people and all kinds of stuff. So, balance is a interestingly kind of fraught topic. And I think they've overcorrected in some games. And I think in other games, they've said, hey, we don't even care. As I said, I think the Palladium games are interesting in that case. Part of the really interesting question to ask ourselves is, what do we expect of balance?
Let's talk about balance in kind of two perspectives. We got one, which is the player's perspective, but we also have a GM's perspective. Let's talk real quick about the player's perspective.
So when players think something's out of balance, what are they looking at?
Damage output might be the number one thing. Am I doing as much damage in relation to my friend across the table? Could maybe be my durability. Do I have the ability to protect myself? Mm-hmm. For a mage, that could be your armor spells. Do you have the ability to get out of combat if I need to? But there's also things like, am I utilized well? What's my utility in the group?
Do I have versatile abilities that even if I'm not doing the most damage in the group, make me feel like I'm still contributing something significant?
And I know for a fact, Ben, you've had situations where you felt like you had a character that just didn't feel very utilized out of combat.
I've got a monk who I didn't give him any real out of combat skills. He doesn't have any special lore or history or religion or anything that would make him in nature. Nothing really that's useful.
He's always itching to get in combat because
I don't know what I was thinking.
He doesn't know what to do with his time.
Yeah. So players can sense imbalance from combat. They can sense imbalance from maybe not having non-combat contributions to make. There's also another thing, which is kind of this social element in terms of screen time. Social characters especially, this will be important, but essentially any time where the player gets a chance to play their character, gets to have a little spotlight time, that's a thing that can also play a role in balance. If you've got some characters that are always in that limelight and other characters are just never there, part of that is you as a GM need to engage those players. And we've talked about engagement, but that's another way in which players can feel it's unbalanced.
We also have the GM side of things. The GM would think about all those things that the player is. They should be thinking about all those things because that's in the player's mind. So on top of that, they're also thinking of things like story compatibility. Does the party's balance allow me to run the type of story that I want to run? So, example could be you got maybe a party that's just laden with a lot of melee characters,
Right.
Am I going to...
Not much in the way of spell casting or something?
Or maybe they just don't have the skills, because that might be come into more combat design, but let's say they don't have the skills to push the story in the direction I usually like. Maybe they don't have a lot of knowledge about history. So now I can't engage them on some of the history of the world. I'm being cut off some of the avenues to which I am accustomed to telling a story. So that story compatibility may not be there with a group that doesn't have any relevant skills that will facilitate that. But then you also have combat design. And I've seen this at a table for the first time, actually, in the game I've been running. You're in it, Ben.
Okay.
It's a very combat-heavy game, and there's no room sweepers.
There's no fireball.
Yeah.
There's no chain lightning. There's no thing that does crowd control.
So what this, interesting, I found out does, I can't really run those types of combats which have these big scale, like lots of mobs come in, because they'll just take forever.
Because they have to be addressed individually. I've got to fight this one and then that one,
Yeah.
and one after it.
So that's changed a little bit of what I could do narratively as a GM in the realm of combat.
I also think if you're a GM and you're thinking about different kinds of ways in which the imbalances have implications for you, does it also support the kind of pace that you want in your game? You know, if you've got characters that take a lot of transaction time and each one of them does, you might get bogged down in certain ways. So there's a lot with respect to how you tell stories, what kinds of combats you can do, what kinds of actions the party can take that plays a big role in how the time at the table gets spent. And if all of that ultimately comes out to, hey, this wasn't a lot of fun, then you may need to do some tweaking.
Can I give a quick just example of what you're talking about with pacing for the audience? I'm thinking of one would be like a summoner, maybe.
Okay.
If you got a table that takes a long time in combat, and now somebody's got a summoner and he's got 6 creatures he's got to resolve their combat, that could ruin the pacing of your adventure. So maybe that's something you need to consider. Or maybe you got too many bards and they all want that face time. So just those kind of classes and things could slow things down for pacing wise.
Okay, so we've talked about different ways of defining balance and how that imbalance might come about. We've talked about a bit of the history and some of the backstory on balance and why we even care about it, or how different systems kind of evolved in terms of balance. We've talked about what imbalance looks like from the player's perspective and from the GM's perspective. And Mark, let's get to it. How do we then fix all this? What do we do when our system is unbalanced?
Well, first of all, you gotta ask yourself, should it be unbalanced, or should it be balanced? Like if you're playing like that risk, like you were saying, maybe you don't need to. If the goal of a balanced game is that everybody's having a good time, then if they're having a good time, it doesn't matter. That's
a really good note. Actually, it's worth really parking on for a second.
Yeah.
The golden rule here is fun. I know this actually is the case with some board games, and I'm thinking here about Talisman. I have a great time playing Talisman. Oh, yeah. It is a bonkers, unbalanced game, and you never know what's going to happen. Crazy things happen.
Prophetess for the win!
Different characters. That's right. So anyways, RPGs could be like that too. So think about whether or not it should be balanced.
Yeah. And some games, that's okay. So if you want to balance it, what are the tools that we would use? I had mentioned earlier that sometimes if I realize there's an imbalance with combat where somebody's maybe not doing as much, a simple item could maybe resolve that. Maybe get that one person a certain item that might get them up a little bit more in parity with the others, make them feel a little bit more included in those combats.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. That's a very easy, quick thing to give, because a lot of times in fantasy games, I'm thinking about D&D especially, items are very much coded to certain classes or certain kinds of characters. So that's a really good note. The other thing that we've seen a lot in more recent times is the evolution of what we could call metacurrencies.
What is a metacurrency?
Yeah, that's a big word. All right. So, so these are in games where you might have hero action points, inspiration, resolve. Okay. There's a lot of different terms for this, but they might be things that let you re-roll a dice, or they might be things that let you change something in the scene, or they might be something that let you come back from the edge of death, or it could be lots of different things. But this is something we're seeing in a lot of games, and that's one of the great tools that you could have. And if you don't have it in your system, it's actually something you could just introduce. You could house rule up your own action currency that gives the players extra capability. I want to highlight for special consideration here, special merit, our old buddy Len Pimentel, who wrote into Prowlers and Paragons this concept of resolve. And the metacurrency in that game is cool because if your character doesn't have the top level stats, you get more resolve. So this is kind of like how Batman keeps up with Superman in those kinds of games, right? Is that Batman doesn't have the most strength. He doesn't have as much strength as Superman, but he's got this great meta currency that gives him some dramatic opportunities.
And Aquaman could talk to some fish.
That's right. Aquaman, I'm sure, has some more resolve. So with that in mind, Mark, these are some different things we talked about, thinking about whether it should be balanced, meta currencies. You've got a list of great practical tips here. So why don't you hit us with that and let us know what's up?
Yeah, let's go through a few of these quickly. Be transparent with your intentions. Let people know what type of game you're going to be running. And that might help you out with not only with the character design. When people are making their characters, people will now kind of know what the object of the game is and make characters accordingly. Address inequities as you see them. Do this early. If you see something that's a little out of whack, try to address it so it doesn't get out of hand. Listen to your players. Value their input. If a player tells you they're not happy about something, listen to them. They might be wrong. No,
it's possible.
No, but you got to listen to them, and you got to understand where they're coming from and why they feel like there's an inequity. Adapt. We're GMs. We have to adapt all the time. So just be prepared to adapt on the fly.
Yeah, like right in the moment, I think is the idea here, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked in some ways about the encounters and stuff, and like how you can just not have the other guys come through that door, or you could have some guys come through that door.
Yeah, balance your encounters on the fly.
Okay, and then number 5.
Sharing your spotlight. Sharing the spotlight, make sure everybody gets a chance to shine. This is probably the most important balancing thing, I would say, of almost all the rules, is you want to make everybody at the table feel included. You got to be a good host. I've been at the table, Ben, with very shy players. It's important that you give those shy players as much time as the players who are flamboyant.
Right.
Really, one of the great tricks you could do as a GM or as a player really is you want to get your players to help you achieve these goals of balance, particularly that one where you're sharing the spotlight. Other players should be recognizing that one player who's quiet and try to include them.
If you're not playing with randos, if you're playing with kind of regular players week to week,
mm-hmm.
these are people that also want to play with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so they will help you when it comes to, hey, let's make sure that so-and-so has a moment here to shine. What would you like to do? Or
Yeah.
I think this is your moment to press the switch, or whatever it might be.
That being said, I have pulled players aside who have been really charismatic and flamboyant and maybe making a lot of it about them in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I've pulled them aside and say, I love what you're doing. I think you're doing awesome things with your character. Can you bring some of the other players in to what you're doing?
I think it's fantastic.
And they usually respond quite excited about that.
Well, it gives them a little bit of a leadership role. And that's
mm-hmm.
always great.
Ben, you run a lot of one-shots versus campaigns. And tell me a little bit how like balancing one-shots is so different in a campaign real quick.
Yeah. So convention games are a common example of this, or sample games, demo games you might want to run at your local game store. There's a lot that goes into a one-shot game. But the thing about a one-shot game is right there in the title, you've only got that block of time. And let's just say, for example, it's 4 hours. You've only got that 4-hour block to make everything happen in that block of time, which means every role needs to shine in that limited time frame that you've got.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing a one shot, a lot of times that's not something where people are going to spend the time to make characters for that one shot, because they're not going to be playing them over a long term. So
you might not even trust people to bring made characters because they could be wildly different.
Yeah. Well, and also you don't know if they're going to fit the story. So if I'm doing a one shot, I'm almost always going to pre-gen those characters. And that means that I can establish balance between the encounters and the capabilities of the party and the breadth of the party's capabilities relative to each other. I can do all that stuff ahead of time so that then when I hand out the characters, they can pick and choose. They can assemble that party within the parameters I've set that I'm confident about. And then the trick is making sure everybody's got a moment for that character to shine. And if you've done a good job with a one shot, you'll have those moments for every character in that game. When the moment comes up, you can look at that player. And if they haven't done anything before then, you can go, now's your moment. So that's how I tend to try to keep one shots balanced and achieve everything I need to achieve within that 4-hour block. Mark, when we've got more time, when we're doing a campaign week over week, how do we think about balance in those cases? What are some of our campaign level balance options?
Characters grow and they level throughout the course of a game. So you're going to see moments where, if you're looking at a graph where players are spiking all over the place and some are gaining more power than others. It could just be introduction of an item or something like that. So you're going to be watching that and keeping your eye on those players to see who might be pulling too far ahead, who's lagging too far behind. You're going to want to try to keep these interesting journey together.
With the one shot, of course, with pre-generated characters, they're not going to change and grow over time. But here, you've got an ongoing task to do, which it's cool because on the one hand, as you're saying, they're going to grow and change and they could start to pull apart from each other in terms of their capability. But at the same time, you've got also time to adjust and to make those changes you need.
These imbalances, if they're unattended, only become more apparent as the game progresses. So you have to make adjustments, micro adjustments on the fly all the time. You're going to need to adapt your encounters. You're going to want to create that balance within that story as the campaign progresses. The campaign is a living, breathing thing, and it needs to be attended to all the time. Think of it as a garden, you know?
Yeah, you need to maintain lots of things periodically and keep everything in balance. Okay, well, so balance in tabletop RPGs, we've covered it in a lot of different ways. We've talked about it in a lot of different ways. As you can see, it's kind of not just one thing. It's a kind of a multi-dimensional thing that we're trying to do. The end of this discussion really is just to say that, look, as always, listen to your party, listen to your group, listen to the people who are having fun. Because I'll just reiterate that point we made earlier. That's the golden rule, right? Balance is whatever is serving the objective of fun in your game. And it could be that sort of what would otherwise be wildly imbalanced is a great solution for you.
So wrapping up here with our final thoughts on balance in tabletop RPGs. Hey, we don't know what your table's like. Just be thoughtful. Hopefully some of these things will trigger some ideas in your mind about what you can do to make your game balanced for your players, because it is important. It's important to those players, or some of them maybe not for everybody.
And because it's a multidimensional thing, it may be that you can strike a balance where some characters are doing more in combat, some characters are getting more screen time, other characters have great utility and are contributing things that are not combat related. And it may be that you can strike a balance between all that stuff in ways that your players like. Here is our tune-up segment request. We have someone who wrote in and said, hey, I've seen DMs run quote-unquote casino sessions where they appear to make up a card or a dice game that fits the era and the party storyline, essentially on the fly. How might I give my players a chance to battle on the bays when the opportunity arises? Mark, I had to look up the word bays.
What does that mean? I was looking at that going, what is a bays? I don't have no idea.
So a bays, I guess, is that kind of felt surface that you play on in Vegas or on a poker table or whatever. That's a bays? That's what they call that, I guess.
All right. Well, the battle on the bays. I mean, why can't you just play a real card game, I guess, is one thing I would think.
Well, I think this is a little bit like the complaint some players have with like riddles and in-game puzzles where they're like, look, my character has got a high intelligence. I do not.
Oh, that's a fair point.
My character may have a better card skill than I have. So I think if you're going to do essentially these kinds of gambling situations or games of chance, things like that in a game, first of all, they are great. It is one of the great moments in any James Bond movie where he's sitting there, dealing cards with the arch bad guy, and there's all kinds of discussion happening and they're talking to each other. And, you remember, Mark, when you were talking earlier about having your villains be in places where you can't just go jump them. You've got to actually sit there and talk trash to them and stuff like that. Yeah. So this is a place where you can do that kind of thing, is in this casino setting. And what's great about it is that these are happening in every kind of genre we've got. You've got fantasy casino type things. You've got modern day, of course. You've got sci-fi casinos and so on. Yeah. I think the trick with this is if you want to give your players something fun that will also respect the fact that their characters are very capable, you'll want to come up with whatever a game of chance is going to be, probably with the dice that you've got at the table and with some kind of skill or modifier or something based on the capabilities of the characters.
One thing that I'm thinking about just, as you're talking, I would think making them roll multiple times would be important. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say making them roll. I mean, just make it layered is what I'm thinking of.
Right.
Because if you just have them roll once and say, oh, make a gambling check, not very exciting, huh?
Yeah.
But if you have multiple levels, maybe where there's modifiers between the different levels, maybe you're moving up, showing that they're moving up to a tougher table with people who can play cards better or more skilled.
Yeah, talk about a great moment to introduce memorable NPCs.
Yeah, you can bring in an NPC that could really, all of a sudden, you get moved up to the table with the other card sharks. And now you can really start having some fun. Maybe have the other players roll, they're at the table with them.
Remember that the stakes in these kinds of gambling situations should quickly run into something that's significant to the players. If they don't win or lose more than a couple bucks, essentially, then that'll be fine. It's a neat distraction for a moment. You can say you had the experience. But what happens if one of them says, hey, you look like you're down a few bucks. How about you bet that starship?
Oh, yeah. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Or I really like that family heirloom you got there, that sword.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, is that your father's watch that you got there?
And then you can start getting into some fun with maybe there's some other things going on. Sleight of hands.
Don't feel bad about cheating.
Yeah. Make it multi-leveled, though. Don't just make it one roll.
Yeah.
Give it layers and make those layers each one exciting.
Well, I like the idea of those layers being a little bit of like, hey, tell a story with this. I've done these kinds of encounters where I told it in like a few different steps. I said, all right, at the beginning of the night, let's roll and see how you guys all do. And then they all kind of rolled. And then it was like, all right, well, this is how things are progressing for about the first hour or so of your card game or whatever it was. Let's roll again and see how things are going kind of in the middle. And what's fun is that you could bring in things like, oh, in these middle sections, people are starting to cheat a little more, or maybe you made an enemy out of that one NPC and he might try to catch up with you later. Or when you get down to the end stages, the very last set of rolls you're going to do, right? Now it's getting for real.
Be fun with it, though. Have fun and be dynamic. Like if you have a character in the party who's the lucky halfling who has the trait.
Yeah.
And that lucky halfling says, oh, I'll kiss the dice for good luck. And you roll a 1, let them re-roll it.
Yeah.
Have fun with it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love the idea of using not just the villains cheating, but like weirdly, it might seem encouraging the players to do that too. What kind of dirty underhanded tricks will your artificer bring to a craps table? One other thing to do as well, and I think we've kind of alluded to this a little bit, is don't overlook that the characters in these kinds of settings are also going to be playing the psychology of these NPCs. So spending a little time developing that psychology, do these NPCs have tells? Are they getting frustrated or easily? There's all kinds of stuff like that. And I've had some games where I said, okay, look, the base stat for this could be Dex if you're going to try to cheat, or it could be your social skill or your intelligence if you want to try to count cards maybe, or if you want to try to psych out the players as you play. So I think there's a lot of fun to be had if you start thinking more broadly than just the mechanics of the game.
Can I also make one suggestion too, and that's just to be somewhat definitive of what the role that you need to make is.
Yeah.
And I say that because games are very definitive, particularly like card games or dice games. You're going to have the result right there. It's going to be black and white. You won or you lost with a card game.
Even if that's an opposed roll too, right?
Yeah.
You could say something like, well, you need to hit a static number of 10, and that's very clear. Or you could say you need to beat that guy.
Yes. So be very clear about what the definition of what victory is. Don't be wishy-washy where you're like looking at that dice going, well, I think you did it enough. That's not going to suffice for the players. They want to know if they won or lost.
Well, friends, I think that's our tune-up segment for this week. We are going to be back next week with another episode of Tabletop Tune-Up. We hope in the meantime, if you have your insights and thoughts about how to balance your party and your game, you'll share them with us at tabletoptuneup@gmail.com, and send us your tune-up requests as well. Any kind of idea, character, how to do something in a game, how to manage your table. We're excited to talk to you in either that email, tabletoptuneup@gmail, or drop us a comment in one of our YouTube pages. Thanks again. Until then, keep those dice rolling.
Tune up, level up your fun, tune up. Your quest has now begun, tune up. We'll show you how it's done. Tune up, tune up, tune up, tune up. Tune up, level up your fun, tune up. Your quest has now begun, tune up. We'll show you how it's done. Tune up, tune up, tune up, tune up. quest has now begun. Tune up, we'll show you how it's done. Tune up, tune up.